All right, everyone, welcome to the Farsight Intelligence Briefing for this Sunday on the 28th. We're running late. Now, let me just be honest with you about what's happening. We're talking about a very important topic today, but I literally just got back from Africa, and I'm jet lagged. So that's why we're starting this 2 hours later than what we were expecting to start. So I was originally scheduling it for 2 hours earlier, and 2 hours before that I decided to take a brief nap just to rest up so I could be ready for this and be ready to go, and 4 hours later I woke up. So that was honestly what happened. I just got back from Africa. We were on the east coast of Africa, Aziz and I, and we were literally going over the stuff that I'm about to be talking about today. And there was a ton of stuff, and we needed a change of pace and a change of location, so we could just sort of get away and sort of focus on what's going on. This is the time of change, and we really needed to just get into a different mental space so we could sort of figure out what to do. So at Farsight, we have lots of different shows and programs, and that's going to be changing because the times are changing and we need to be able to adapt to it. For those of you who are following the news, there's a huge amount of stuff going on. First of all, we had the political conventions, and the political conventions were, so far, one has happened and one's still to happen. And so the Republican was much more sedate than what we were expecting to be for the Democratic National Convention, and that's what we were expecting. The police were out in major force. There was a few disturbances. Of course, right before that, there was the assassination attempt on former President Trump. And so there was a little bit of chaos that we were picking up with our remote viewing with regard to all of that. But all of the remote viewers said that what's happening in the Democratic Convention, which is in August, there's more disturbance. So there's more, people on the street, things like that. So we're heading in towards a time of, beginning disturbance. And then we're expecting, based on our remote viewing results, for things to basically start coming apart, come around the actual election and soon after. We're fully expecting this to be a fully disputed election. And the level of polarization that we're seeing is extraordinary on any standards. Now, basically the idea is what normally happens with normal electoral politics. And this is elections and voting is a specialty. I mean, at the university, that's what I teach, elections and voting. That's one of the courses. Normally what happens with both parties is that during the primary season, there is a increase of dramatic rhetoric that really helps bring out the base for the primary season. And then when the conventions happen, there's a pivot towards the center. So there's a shift towards the center where the polarization is ended and you reach out for the other party. And when the assassination attempt happened on former President Trump's life, the expectation was with that incredible, graphics that came out right after that with the fist pump and fight, and the American flag behind him and the Secret Service people protecting him all over. My own assumption was this is the time for that pivot to the center, because you couldn't get a more heroic type of image coming out of that. But what we got at the Republican National Convention was just the opposite. We got a continuation of the extreme polarization. And, basically this is, you're saying it's my way or the highway type of stuff, and the Democratic side is thought of as the total enemy. So that level of polarization is not pivoting towards the center. On the Democratic side, you have the ratcheting up of fear and concern about the fate of the democracy and things like that. So what we're expecting is that now that Kamala Harris is going to be the nominee on the Democratic side, once the election actually happens, there's two outcomes. You could have former President Trump win the election, in which case the Democratic side is, those people are simply not going to accept that outcome sitting down, so there's going to be some trouble. If Kamala Harris wins, on the other hand, the Republican side is simply not going to accept that. They'll say there's a stolen election, and there's going to be trouble. And you're really heading towards a situation with such extreme polarization. You're looking at something that could turn into what's the American modern-day equivalent of a civil war, where people are fighting on the streets. So the American side is really heading towards extreme tumult, because the pivot towards the center to reach out and bring people in, and it's just not happening. And so the sides are not going to be sort of sedate. And then the military, the head of the National Security Council in the past, a general, the top general in the Pentagon in the recent times, has said that he's concerned about the military, because a lot of the generals in the last election, there was 124 generals and admirals who signed a petition essentially questioning the validity of the last election. And you're seeing a situation where the military may split, where some of the generals and admirals may lead their troops and say, we think the correct person is Donald Trump that won the election, and the others will say, no, the correct person that won the election is Kamala Harris. And so the military has the potential for splitting. So what you're seeing is extreme polarization and the potential for conflict even in the United States. But the idea that everybody is simply going to say, well, that's it, that's who won the election, fair and square, and that's the end of it, that doesn't seem to be in the cards right now. So this is brand new territory. We haven't seen anything like that since the American Civil War. So we don't really know what's going to happen. And then you see what's going to happen elsewhere in the world. You have a situation in Europe where the Ukraine conflict is becoming more and more desperate. They may work out a negotiated solution with Russia. On the other hand, it may go in the military way that will possibly bring in the threat of nuclear situations. So like small nuclear bombs, such as tactical nuclear weapons. And then you're talking about the possibility in the Israeli Middle East conflicts of that blowing up in an extreme way. Because what you're seeing with the Israeli situation is the war. It's been going on in Gaza with the Palestinians and the Hamas, and it looks like it's going to be exploding into Lebanon. And all the major players are saying that if it does explode into Lebanon, then the major players are going to pile in. And you're talking about sort of an entire axis, a front of soldiers and people and weapons from every possible place, including Iran, Afghanistan, Lebanon, Syria, sort of piling in, and of course Yemen, and making the situation a much bigger conflict, which would drag the Americans in, not just to supply weapons to Israel, but actually starting to help fight on the Israeli side. And that could change absolutely everything, because then you have the possibility of major weapons being used in Israel. Now, they don't have to be nuclear. They can be large bombs. They have large bombs. And those large bombs can, knock out a few city blocks at a time, just really big. They started to use those bombs in the Vietnam War, and they created lakes, essentially what they did. If you go to Vietnam now, it looks like Minnesota, the land of 1,000 lakes. And what those lakes are, Vietnam didn't have all those lakes. They had rivers and things, but what they did is they dropped these large bombs during the Vietnam War, and they created these craters. These craters were huge, and the craters they filled up with water because it rains a lot in Vietnam, and so now there's lakes all over the place, and the lakes are now sources for fishing. So they have fish farms all over Vietnam where these bombs were dropped, and now the lakes are there. So you're having the possibility of very large bombs being dropped. But the number of troops that are opposed against Israel are dramatically different than in past days, and they're extremely well organized and extremely well weaponized. So the weapons that Israel used to face back in the day, back in the decades past, where they had a dramatic advantage over their opponents, that's simply gone. Just doesn't exist anymore. So now you have extremely advanced weapons coming in that Hezbollah has, and being supplied by Iran, and so you're having a change in the military conflict, and so the potential for that to blow up huge is a major thing. And then the question is what's going to happen with China and Taiwan, because is China going to just let this all happen, or is it going to take advantage of the situation in which there is global instability and the United States really can't respond to every little situation or every big situation or every intermediate situation on the globe at the exact same time? So those things are going to happen. So you have United States in political turmoil, Europe because of Ukraine in escalating turmoil. We really don't know what's going to happen with that unless there's a negotiated solution, and which is essentially a surrender on the Ukrainian side and saying we'll accept whatever Russia wants to do. And then you have a situation in the Middle East that looks like it's going out of, exploding. And there was also the situation where there was an attack in the Golan Heights, and that actually affected mostly Druze, and the Druze, they normally are not accepting Israeli citizenship because they used to belong to Syria, and so they've not really fully integrated themselves with Israel themselves. And then there's dispute going on right now of whether it was actually Hamas that attacked the Golan Heights that killed a bunch of people, including children, in a sports setting on the Golan Heights, or whether it was misfiring of the Israeli rockets that were headed towards Hezbollah, but just went and misfired. And there's video evidence to suggest that it could be something that misfired on the Israeli side. So we really don't know what caused the attack. However, whenever you want an attack, whenever you're planning an attack on a country, a major escalation, it's pretty much normal standard operating procedures to have it such that it looks like the people that you're going to attack attacked first. You never want to attack and be the first person to attack. You always want there to be an attack by the opponents, and then it seems like you're just responding because you have to respond because people were killed. So we really don't know what happened at in the Golan Heights to cause the most recent attack. We know that Israel is blaming Hezbollah. Hezbollah is denying it. And then they have some video evidence where you actually can see it's unclear what you see, but you see rockets going in weird directions, and it could have been some type of Israeli misfire. So you really don't know what's going on. But what we do know is that it could have been from Hezbollah. It could have been Israeli misfire. We simply don't know. We don't know what to believe from the mainstream news because mainstream news is heavily manipulated. It could go either way. So I am not saying that the attack was done by Hezbollah. I'm not saying it was Israeli misfires. I'm just saying you can't get that information from the mainstream. But what we do know is when somebody is planning on attacking somebody else, they're usually get some type of a situation where they cause what looks like an attack from the opponent, so it looks like they're defending themselves. This goes way back to the time of Bismarck. Yeah, this is, before the German Empire became a German Empire, before Germany became a Germany. So what happened way back in the 1800s was that the Germans were basically a bunch of principalities, and there was a guy who was running Prussia called Wilhelm, and he had an assistant. His chief sort of Secretary of State type of person was a guy called Bismarck, and Bismarck wanted to create a unified Germany. So what happened was that Wilhelm had a relative of his in Spain, and he was trying to manipulate the situation such that his relative became the King of Spain. Well, Napoleon, and that's not Napoleon Bonaparte, he was a relative of his after Napoleon Bonaparte was running France, and so there was a bunch of Napoleons. There wasn't just one. But so when I say Napoleon, we're not talking Napoleon Bonaparte, but a cousin, like descendant, nephew thing. Anyway, Napoleon was running France, and he said he sent his ambassador to Wilhelm of Prussia and said, "Don't you dare mess with Spain," because France then didn't want potential enemies on both sides, on Spain and Germany. Of course, there wasn't yet a Germany, but the German principalities. And Wilhelm politely said, "Well, I can't promise that we'll never do it, but we'll try to be friendly about the whole thing, and we'll back down and just relax for now, chill out." The Bismarck. Oh, and then he sent a telegram saying that to Napoleon. Wilhelm didn't know that Bismarck intercepted that telegram. It's famously called the Elm telegram. And Bismarck rewrote the telegram, essentially giving Napoleon the bird. And said, "We're going to do whatever the blankety blank we want to do, and you can go to hell." Well, Napoleon popped the cork, and he then just got all of his troops and invaded what looked like the German principalities back then, which is exactly what Bismarck wanted. So then Bismarck, of course, didn't tell anyone that he had messed with the telegram. And so what you had is that Bismarck then had a situation where it looked like Napoleon was attacking the German principalities without any provocation at all. And so the German principalities met, and they had a convention. Immediately they had a convention, and they unified and formed the German nation. So that was how Germany actually started as a nation. And then a unified Germany with everyone saying, "What? What did we do? We didn't do anything, and Napoleon's attacking us. This is crazy." So they unified, became a German nation. Bismarck was smiling from ear to ear. And so he essentially tricked Napoleon into making an attack so that the German nation would coalesce out of the German principalities, and they'd become an actual state. That's exactly what happened. And then a unified Germany then fought Napoleon, beat Napoleon, captured Paris, and separated out afterwards, and that was how Germany became Germany. So that's a standard operating procedure. So whenever you have something that you want to do militarily, you make it look like there was an attack on the other side. Now in the Vietnam War, we had the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, where they had the USS Maddox, a destroyer, attacked by a North Vietnamese, basically patrol boat. Now, that was a really small thing. There was some small arms fire. It was first the USS Maddox was in the territorial waters of North Vietnam, and basically a small patrol boat came out, and a couple of shots were fired. Apparently, one of the bullets may have dinged the USS Maddox, which is a joke because it's a little bullet, hitting the side of a destroyer didn't do anything. But it was reported that to Congress, the President Johnson said, "This is an outrage. We were attacked, unprovoked." And then there was another attack 2 days later, and that attack was reported as a second provocation of the North Vietnamese attacking U.S. forces. Now that attack, the second attack, simply did not happen. It was a total fabrication. There was no second attack. And again, the first attack was just one boat out there with somebody with a rifle, and they had some small arms fire. So there was nothing major at all that happened. Now, President Johnson at the time went to Congress and said, "This is an outrage. We have to be able to defend ourselves." And Congress said, "This is crazy. This is terrible. We have to be able to defend ourselves." So they passed the Gulf of Tonkin resolution in response to this major attack. Now, this is not in dispute, what I just discussed. Not what happened with Germany, with Bismarck, nor the Vietnam War. Those things are not in dispute. The only thing that is not publicly known is whether President Johnson knew he was lying to Congress about the North Vietnamese attacks on the USS Maddox, or whether he was duped by his aides into lying to Congress. So maybe he was innocent and didn't know. But it's really hard to believe that the president would be lied to by his aides. But nonetheless, that the historians debate about that to this day. They do not debate about whether President Johnson was lying to Congress about the Gulf of Tonkin incident. What they do debate about is whether he knew he was lying to Congress. Okay, and then of course that created the escalation of the Vietnam War, and the rest is history. So the idea of always having an attack from the opponents and then making that into a major thing and then having a response, that's pretty standard. So what you're seeing right now is, right as I am recording this intelligence briefing, there appears to be what looks like a major military intervention that's going to be happening in Lebanon against Hezbollah. But that's probably going to accelerate and expand into much of Lebanon itself. And so, really what happened at the Golan Heights is not at all clear, because you can't get that information from the mainstream. You don't know if it's a situation of an attack that actually Hezbollah did, or something that was an error on the Israeli side. I'm not making any claims one way or the other. I'm just saying we don't know, because you just can't trust the mainstream reporting on these issues. So anyway, but nonetheless, it does appear that there is a major escalation in the Middle East conflict that is going to be out of proportion to anything we've seen in the past. So the old days, when Israel got into battles, into wars, they were quick. They were 7-day wars, 10-day wars. What we're seeing now is nothing like that. We're seeing things that the opponents are very well armed, and it looks like it could go on for a long time, which would suggest that the Israelis would have to have much bigger weapons. It would be a much bigger deal to fight it. So to have the war end quickly, you're not going to be able to just use the regular types of weapons, so you'll have a major escalation. That's what we're sort of expecting on that side. So what we're looking toward is major global war, and that fits into a situation where our projects at Farsight indicate major crises are occurring. Now, as you know, for those of you who follow Farsight, we have long been focused on the idea of extraterrestrials, and basically nothing happens major in the world that doesn't have some type of extraterrestrial involvement in it. And we have basically two types of extraterrestrials we've been focusing on, what we call the good guys and the bad guys, the good ETs and the bad ETs. And the bad ETs really fundamentally do not want humanity to settle down, because if humanity settles down and the disclosure process continues, what you're basically going to get is a situation where people will openly recognize that there are extraterrestrials, that the UFO situation or UAP situation is real, and then you're going to get a situation where people will ask questions, and the obvious question is not, are they here? Do they exist? The question is, what have they been doing all these years? That's the important thing. And the bad ETs don't want that because they've been running this place as a prison planet for a very long time. So you have a situation in which the good ETs want the prison to end. They want to shut it down. They want to free everybody. But the bad ETs say this is their resource and it's their planet, and they have written agreements between the U.S. government and themselves to allow themselves to continue working in a clandestine manner. And those written agreements stipulate specifically that the secrecy must be continued. So the payback to the United States government is that they get technology transfer assistance when you have crashed UFOs, basically UFOs that are being shot down by the American secret space program. You get those UFOs and then you reverse engineer some of the technology. And the U.S. government is split, especially the U.S. military is split. Half of them are, I'm not sure what the percentages are, but let's say half. Half of them say we have these written agreements and we're getting technological help for military stuff. And the other half of the military says this is crazy. These people are terrible. These beings are terrible, and we're being used basically as a lapdog military force for their ends. And so the bad ETs cannot shoot down the ships of the good ETs. Otherwise, a Cold War between the two sides would turn into a hot war. But on the other hand, they can arm the U.S. secret space program, and then the U.S. secret space program can shoot down the ships of the good ETs. So what you get is you get some ships being sort of tricked or lured into delicate situations, and then American secret space program ships just show up and boom, they shoot them down. And the good ETs will not defend themselves because then the U.S. government would say, gosh, these people are fighting us. And that would throw the U.S. government further into the hands of the bad ETs. So the good side is letting it happen when they get sort of tricked into situations where their ships become vulnerable. And those ships crash. And when those ships crash, they're then taken to Area 51 or some other places and taken apart, and then the survivors of the crash are given to the bad ETs, and awful things happen. So all of this is going on behind the scenes, and and the bad ETs don't want people to know that that's going on. So this is a huge issue that's happening with the American secret space program, and all of that would come out if humanity settled down. So these wars are a big deal. It's a huge deal to keep the world sort of focused on these dramatic situations. On the other hand, when the chaos gets to a point where it becomes obvious that the governments can't control things and it may just end up with nuclear attacks, then the good ETs, who are basically fanatical supporters of free will, then they can intervene, because then you get a situation where the planet and could just go belly up. And when they intervene, then it'd be obvious that there are the extraterrestrials. You can't deny it anymore. And then the basic Cold War between the good side and the bad side, that's gonna turn into a hot war, and everybody will see that. And so that type of situation can only happen if the entire world political climate completely melts, so that the entire planet is at risk. So what we're assuming is that the good ETs, actually we have been told this, that the good ETs they're not causing any of the crises, but they're helping to condense them so that they all happen at the same time, and helping to get the situation to a point where it can't be controlled anymore, and then it forces some type of intervention on the part of the good ETs, which then lets the disclosure thing happen really quickly. And it looks like we're heading into that situation soon, within like 6 months. It looks like we're getting to a point where the boiling will be unmistakable and uncontrollable. So that's it's the old situation of the frog that's in boiling water. If the frog is placed in water and it's just cool, and then the heat is slowly raised up, the frog sort of doesn't know what's happening and eventually gets cooked. But if the frog is placed into water that's already boiling, it jumps out. So it's that type of a situation where the change that's happening in the world has to be rapid in order for humanity to sort of break out of this. So it's really important for everybody to understand that the situation that's happening in the war is being manipulated such that all of these crises burst into an uncontrollable situation. So that's what we're expecting. We're expecting this to build on both sides. We're not expecting everything to chill out and calm down. We're expecting everything to build up. And it's not the fault of the humans that are out there. They're being manipulated. Human leadership is being manipulated, mental manipulation, as well as things like bribery and fear and all types of ways to control human leadership. But also the manipulation occurs on the level of the masses by keeping everyone in a sort of a chaotic state. So that's coming to a head, and we're trying to put everything together, and in this intelligence briefing, I'm trying to sort of piece it all together for you. So how are we responding with this in Farsight? Well, part of it is the projects that we're doing, both in the past as well as current. But also we're changing things in terms of a daily situation. I'm going to look off to the side now just to make sure everything is going okay. And it seems that everything is happening on YouTube the way it's supposed to be happening. We have a good turnout, even though we started late and so on. Now, this whole thing is going to be put up as a permanent recording on farsightprime.com by tomorrow. So, this is, you'll all be able to see it. But let me explain what we basically have. I'm going to go through the basic lineup of shows that we have. Now, we have two basic venues. One is farsightprime.com, our streaming service, where we can't simply put up stuff on YouTube without having everything being taken down and losing the channel and so on. So we really have to rely on putting the most important, sensitive stuff, our full projects, up on farsightprime.com, which is our streaming service. Now, we have YouTube shows, however, that we do think so far there have been no problems. And the YouTube shows are Deep News, which we have political stuff where we go behind the scenes, and they come out in multiple installments every month. And then we have the Farsight Update, which sort of tells you what's been going on, what we're doing for the month, and that's going to be changing. I'll explain that in a little bit. We're also adding a new thing that's going to be up on YouTube as well as farsightprime.com, which is Farsight Weekly. And that's going to be something that I do. And instead of having the Farsight update of once a month, I'm going to be out there once a week doing a show. And that's going to be Friday evening. That's what we're expecting. And that's going to be starting next Friday, actually. And now we also have a regular schedule, what we call the Farsight forums. So what we have is people ask a lot of questions on the forums on farsightprime.com. And up until now, we've not had the resources to answer a lot of those questions except by doing more projects. But that's changing. So now we have one person that's being assigned every month to deal with questions and just answer questions. And that person's going to be responding to questions on the Farsight forums that people are asking, but also at the end of the month producing a short video sort of summarizing the major questions and having those questions answered, because our audience really does have really intelligent questions, and they ask these questions, and we've not had a chance to sort of respond on a question-by-question basis. All of that has changed, so is changing starting in August. So we're making a huge effort to deal with the forums and answering questions, interacting with the audience in that way. And then, of course, then we have the intelligence briefing. That's a YouTube thing. So that's basically 5 different shows that happen on YouTube. For Farsight Prime, we have what we call our Earth Mysteries, which is a major project using all of our remote viewers dealing with stuff that's happening on Earth. And that's really been fascinating, and that's going to be continuing. And that happens at the middle of every month. And these are major projects that are 2 to 3 hours long. And then we also have Galactic Mysteries, and that involves the ETs, the Extraterrestrials, and that happens at the end of the first week. So the first week is Galactic Mysteries, and in the middle of the month is Earth Mysteries. We, of course, also have the intelligence briefings, but we also have something called Conversations with Harvey. Now, those are conversations in meetings that we actually have often at the beach in the middle of the night in a secret location where the extraterrestrials actually show up. We've been doing this remote viewing for a long time. So we can sense when we're dealing with extraterrestrials, and we see them, and we see them just the way that we do with when we're remote viewing, and it becomes very second nature and normal for us to be able to see them, even though they're not visible on camera. So in our other way, in our sixth sense, whatever, we see them with their clothes on and so on, and everybody that looks at them, all of Farsight people, we all see the same person or the same group of people. Anyway, so those conversations we have been going on, those are going to continue. However, we're also having the Farsight board meeting. Now, the Farsight board meeting is not the board meeting for the nonprofit, the Farsight Institute. This is the Farsight board where we have all of our remote viewers, and that's actually going to be taking place once a month together with 2 extraterrestrials. So it'll be everybody, and everybody's properly mic'd, and you'll see everybody at the same time. So it's not just one person talking to an extraterrestrial. You've got 4 or 5 or 6 Farsight people in the same room talking with 2 extraterrestrials, and there's a conversation going on where we're going to be dealing with, and we will have someone sort of translating what the telepathic communications are for both of those extraterrestrials, and the Farsight people are responding and interacting. Because so much change is going to be happening in the world, we have to be able to explain it. And the extraterrestrials themselves do not want to appear as if they're not wanting to interact. They do want to interact. It's because interactions normally result in fighting and conflict and people dying among the extraterrestrials that they really can't, because it's all controlled by the Earth environment, is controlled by the bad ETs. So that's why the good ETs have to keep invisible. If they showed up as visible entities, then shooting would occur immediately. And they just simply can't do that. Not until the disclosure thing happens completely. So for a matter of just in order for practical matters, in order for the meetings to occur, they have to rely on us because we can see them, and even though other people cannot see them. And so that the interactions that you're going to see are really remarkable at the board meetings, where everybody's responding to the same things that are being said. And it's just, you have to see it to believe it. Anyway, so those board meetings are going to be going on, where we're talking about the extraterrestrial stuff. A lot of the extraterrestrials, you don't really know what they're going to say. They say all types of stuff, and we end up responding. So I can't tell you what's going to be at every board meeting, but it's going to happen once a month, and and the extraterrestrials want everyone to be able to see how they're trying to interact with humanity and how they're trying to discuss world events, to explain what's going on when all of this chaos is happening. And this is one of their ways that they want to do it. So we're doing this. They want us to do it, and we're doing it, and it's going to be very interesting. In addition, we're having a change in the Identified Flying Objects show. We have been doing a lot of video recording of UFOs using specially modified cameras that allows us to shoot in infrared and at 120 frames a second and see these ships. One of the things that Aziz and I did in Africa was to try to shoot videos of UFOs. We have found that in some locations it's extremely hard to find them. They're just not there. There are a few there, but not many. In major cities like Washington, D.C., or Atlanta and things like that, they're all over the place. But in some places elsewhere in the world, they're not as commonly seen. And there's a possibility that they're also modifying their tech to make it more difficult for us to actually see them. There was a time period when every time we pointed our cameras up, we just saw them all over the place. Any 15-minute video shot had like 30 UFOs, and some of them were really close and swooping down and so on. Now, we still see them over the major areas, major cities, but the idea of them being everywhere, all over the planet at the same time, we're having to modify that. So anyway, so we did a whole a whole bunch of video shoots in Africa, and we didn't see any, which was very unusual for us. So we have our identified flying object show, hosted by Intisam, and often helped with Lincoln Lounsbury, who's a retired flight traffic control expert. And that's going to be happening, but on sort of intermittently, meaning it's not going to be every month. But there is something, and these are all Farsight Prime things, but there is something that's happening with the Farsight Weekly show, which is where I'm talking about what's been going on, especially political stuff, and integrating that with all of our project and remote viewing stuff. And that is that we're basically going to have that into two segments. The first segment will be me talking, summarizing essentially what's happened during the week and how that fits in with our remote viewing stuff. For example, I'll be talking about what's going on during the Democratic National Convention and relating that to our remote viewing results in our deep news projects relating to that convention, and on an ongoing basis every week. But in the second part of that Farsight Weekly show, we're going to have one of our people do an additional thing as well. And for example, Intisam is going to be putting on a section on the end of that for 1 week of the 4 weeks it happens every month, where it will be her focusing on identified flying objects, which is UFO video photography. Aziz is going to be focusing on archaeology. He's a specialist in archaeology. You might call him the remote viewing modern day equivalent of someone like Graham Hancock, where we're putting in he travels all over the world. He's gone to major archaeological sites. He used to do archaeological digs when he was a student at college, and so that's a big interest for him. And so for one of those segments that occurs one time a month, the Farsight Weekly show, one of his segments, which will be after I talk, will be on archaeology. And then there's similarly Yeme, Janae, and Shantae, and possibly also Kamaya will have segments that occur at the end. It'll be very much structured like the Daily Show with Jon Stewart, where you have Jon Stewart talking for the first part, followed by one of the correspondents in that show. And then every week it changes. He's always talking, Jon Stewart's always talking, but the correspondent that follows him changes from week to week. So that's how the Farsight Weekly show is going to be happening as we do this. And the other thing is we have this new studio set up that can do live streaming. Basically, we got fiber in this new studio. I didn't used to have fiber in the studio. We had fiber in the other studio that we own, and so that we have, and that fiber is what we did for all of our live streams in that studio. But this is a different studio where you often see me record, but not live broadcast. But finally, we got fiber in this studio, and so now we can do live broadcasts from this studio. And this is where I'm expecting to do a lot of more spontaneous, more often live streams. So this is going to be a more regular basis. So we have a Farsight Weekly show, but there's going to be lots of other times where I just announce with short notice because something major happens in the news, and I pop up and we just simply do that. And you'll see me, and I'll be talking about it. And this is going to be really interesting, produces a much more lively interaction with what's going on in our projects and our audience, so I can talk with you guys. And then, of course, we also have the forums stuff going on where we're dealing with all the questions in the forums. So that's a real reason to be a subscriber to farsightprime.com, because you get deeply involved in the entire process of us interacting with you. And this simply cannot be done on YouTube. So we have some content that we put up on YouTube, stuff that we think is pretty safe in terms of not being censored and not having the channel taken down, and everything else is on Farsight Prime. Of course, all of our major projects such as Earth Mysteries and Galactic Mysteries, Identified Flying Objects, Intelligent Briefings, things like that, they're all on farsightprime.com. Conversations with Harvey, we simply cannot put that up on YouTube. So that's, and the Farsight board meeting has to be on farsightprime.com. That can't go on YouTube either. Anyway, so, a good example would be when the Daily Show happens with Jon Stewart. He often talks for like 14 minutes. We study that, 14 minutes. And then he'll have a situation where Ronnie Chang and Jordan Klepper come on, where Ronnie Chang maybe will be given 7 minutes, and Jordan Klepper 10 minutes total, for the episode length being, like half an hour. So it's sort of that same model, except instead of having two correspondents come on, we're going to have one correspondent come on after I talk. All right. And the length of the segments that come after I talk on the Farsight Weekly Show, which will be Friday evenings, will be about 5 to 10 minutes. Okay, so now I'm just looking down at my notes here we've covered most of that stuff. A Farsight board meeting was the big one that you're going to want to see. So if you thought the conversations with Harvey were weird, you've not seen anything yet. Wait till you see the whole board meeting where everybody's reacting to at the same time. We gave you a bit of a hint in the last conversations with the ETs, where we had Yeme Shanae and Kamaya Dunson in one group. They were talking with one extraterrestrial on the beach. And then we had Intisam and Shantae talking with one extraterrestrial on the beach. And that was a situation where the ETs wanted that to happen. Actually, it was a 2-day thing where they each talked individually, and we recorded it, but we're not broadcasting that. They each talked individually with an ET, just like the conversation with Harvey. And we wanted them all to get used to that, and the ETs were giving them personal advice on how to deal with it, and they wanted to get each person used to the idea of communicating in that type of format. And then the next day we did video record it, and it was 2 people, Yeme Shanae and Kamaya Dunson on one situation, and then we had Intisam and Shantae on another, where we had 2 people talking with one extraterrestrial. But the board meetings are like 4, 5, or 6 people all talking with 2 extraterrestrials at the same time. So it's a much bigger thing. But you get an idea of how that thing started by looking at the stuff that we just published on the conversations with the extraterrestrials. And it's available on farsightprime.com. The other thing is that in the last conversations we had at the beach with the ETs, the wind was incredible. I mean, it was so strong, and we haven't had a situation where we had to deal with that level of wind. And so you can only do so much to repair that. The basic repair that happens is you have to, in the studio when you're editing, you have to look at stuff that's very low in the frequency range of the audio and cut it out. So you have what they call a high pass filter to let the voice in, but not the wind. That helps to an extent. In a situation in the future when we have strong wind like that, we know how to deal with that. More importantly, you have to get the shotgun mics that we use much closer to the mouth, not like a foot away, but just a few inches away, in order to isolate the voice from the wind. So we know how to deal with that now, but when we recorded those things in the end of June, it was a big deal. That type of wind we had never encountered before. At these locations, remote locations at the beach, you never really know what we're going to be dealing with. But nonetheless, the voice was sufficiently clear in those 2 recordings that we published that you can understand what they're saying. But it will be, if we ever encounter that type of situation again, it will be fixed. It will be better. Okay. This is sort of weird. Let me look to the side to see how things are going. Things seem to be going all right. All right. I want to talk about a situation that's happening with Disney. So, as most people know, George Lucas did 6 Star Wars movies. And they were great. They were classic. And we actually did a project just on George Lucas, where we were investigating how he got the Star Wars ideas. And we basically found that he was he was someone who was involved in a galactic war that occurred long ago, and it's been resolved mostly. And that situation was he came up with the Star Wars ideas, and he almost certainly thinks that they were just an invention that he came up with and is his property, that is basically just creative. But we found out that in fact he was remembering a lot of stuff, and that's where these things came in. For example, this is quite common. When you look at Newton, for example, Newton created the modern calculus as well as modern day classical physics, all in one go in a few years. And Leibniz also did his part with regard to the calculus, but let's just focus on Newton. You can't invent all of calculus and classical physics in just a few years with one person. Those things take hundreds of years to develop over time, sometimes thousands. I mean, it's a big thing. You can't have one person just reinvent all of that stuff. Well, what happened with Newton was he was remembering stuff. And it looks like he's thinking and he's coming up with all these ideas and he's brilliant and a genius. But what he's really struggling to do is to remember things. And he was a prisoner, just like everybody else is a prisoner on the planet. But he was digging things up and his creatively coming up with stuff that he was thinking. But a lot of that stuff was just stuff that he was pulling from distant memory and sort of putting them all together. Because you really can't do what he did. No one can do what he did completely out of whole cloth, reinvent all of calculus and classical physics in just a few years. So that essentially is what George Lucas did. Then George Lucas sold Lucasfilms to Disney, and Disney took it and created, the Star Wars stuff that came after that. Now, the Disney stuff is very different from the original George Lucas stuff. So the original George Lucas stuff was really inspired from our perspective by his memories, and he may not have remembered as or thought of as memories. He may have thought he was just thinking up all this stuff, but from our perspective, it was from his memories of stuff that went on a long, long time ago in this galaxy. And then when Disney took it, they changed it. They took it in a completely different direction. And to be quite honest, they probably thought of George Lucas, as an old idiot who stumbled across an idea of people running around with lightsabers and fighting evil people. But they didn't take it as something real. But George Lucas, from our perspective, was getting things from memory, so there was a real aspect to it, and it resonated with the audience. The audience really the audience knew something was real about this idea of the Force, that something was real about the idea of telepathy, that something was real about the idea of physically manipulating objects, psychokinesis, that type of thing. And the Jedi versus the Sith, there was something real about that. Disney, on the other hand, just thought, well, the audience is there, and so if we buy Star Wars, we get the audience, and then we can do it right. We know how to, and we'll have a bunch of people running around with lightsabers. So the first few Disney movies had the same old plot of there being a Death Star and having Jedis go out and attack the Death Star. I mean, it was just a rehash of the same old stuff, nothing new. And they basically dropped the whole issue of the Force, of being an important or real thing. And then recently they've been starting to, in the recent stuff, TV shows and so on, they've been starting to try to bring back the idea of the Force as being a real thing, an important thing. But it's not been, there's been no really evolution in understanding what the Force actually is. Again, they thought of it as a theatrical trick to sort of keep an audience entertained. But again, they didn't really understand Star Wars or where Star Wars actually came from. And now in their most recent streaming stuff, which is called The Acolyte, that's been a horror from the perspective of the Star Wars original idea. The Jedi are very problematic. They end up slaughtering a whole bunch of people. They end up being bad guys as well. They changed everything. And then they're bringing in a lot of stuff with regard to a woke sort of agenda that was never part of the original idea with Star Wars, but that seems to be a current social thing that the Disney people seem to be embracing and wanting to fight. So Disney really doesn't have much new content other than the old stuff that they used to do, like princesses, seven dwarfs, stuff like that. But they have this Star Wars thing which they've never really understood. So what you have is a situation, of course, these are just all my opinions about this, so you can take it with a grain of salt or a large pinch of salt or whatever, but this is my view of things, that the current stuff coming out of Disney really doesn't look like the original Star Wars stuff. So when we look at Star Wars, I really like people to go back to the original 6 movies. And the first movie, of course, that was done by Lucas is now called Episode 4, A New Hope. And then the second movie that he did was now known as Episode 5, which is The Empire Strikes Back. And then the last in that was Episode 6, which was actually the third movie he did, was The Return of the Jedi. And then he did prequels, which was the episode which turned out to be Episodes 1, 2, and 3, which is The Phantom Menace, The Attack of the Clones, and The Revenge of the Sith. So those 6 movies are really fundamental and really important. Again, we have found there's a tremendous amount of extraterrestrial involvement in a lot of Hollywood stuff, where they drop script ideas and plot ideas into the heads of the scriptwriters when they're sleeping, and it's like dreams, and they wake up in the middle of the night or in the morning and they say, that's a great idea for a new movie or a new TV series or a new something that I just thought of. Now the goody teas are free will fanatics, so they cannot and will not manipulate the scriptwriter to follow through on that, but they can give the suggestion, and then the scriptwriter has to pursue that on herself or himself, all by himself or herself, and that's basically what's been going on. And so you get the Matrix movies, the Star Wars movies, the Star Trek stuff, all that coming out from ideas that the goody teas have been sort of seeding into the producers, writers, and so on in Hollywood in order to get all this stuff coming out, to basically condition the humanity, the public, to the idea of galactic life, galactic conflict, and things like that. So we actually at Farsight like looking at science fiction stuff because we like seeing how the ETs are inserting real content into the the mental environment of humanity. So you can basically say that the good ETs have basically won the hearts and minds of the masses, whereas the bad ETs have control over the political and economic elite. And that's where that sort of struggle goes on. Now, one more thing. Let me just check my clock here so I get an idea of where we are with regard to time. And 10:19. So we're actually getting close to wrapping up now. We're actually going to be trying to do a couple more things at Farsight to make the extraterrestrial stuff a reality. So this is going to sound a little far out to you, but this is some of the things we're actually thinking of doing. We're actually going to be trying to work with fashion. A lot of the people that work at Farsight, Yame Genet, Kamai Dunson, so on, Shante, they were models, and they were important models and actors. I have, for example, with Yame Genet, gone to dramatic performances. One I went to not too long ago was in Athens, Georgia, where they have this incredibly beautiful theater. It's like a Broadway theater. It's the best theater in Athens. She was the star of a play. She was the lead character in the play, and in the best theater in Athens. And believe me, it's totally equivalent on the physical level of what it looks like inside of like Broadway. And she does that. She likes doing that. She has other types of shows that she does all the time. And some of the other people, they're models. So one of the things we're thinking of doing is incorporating their other talents into things we do. And if you look at the type of fashion shows that, say, Rihanna did with her Fenty brand, and especially like the first one, where she did a fashion show that ended up being like a 2-hour show people bought what people paid for on a streaming service, and that actually had Johnny Depp in it as a cameo as one of the models after the famous court case happened with Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, and that happened after that. And there was this Fenty, I think they call it the Savage or something, Savage X or something. There was a fashion show. You can still get it on a streaming service, and it was like an extraterrestrial fashion show where Rihanna was doing really exotic thinking about her fashion design. So we're actually thinking of doing stuff like that to make it a more artistic sort of collage of stuff that we do, and sort of it won't be a major thing that we're taking away from anything else, but we're thinking of doing something along the line of art, simply artwork, to sort of bring some of our content to sort of a new audience. And you'll see sort of costume changes going along with stuff like that. Well, anyway, there's a lot of other stuff we're doing, but those are the major things. More, when I mentioned the fashion show idea, I'm really talking about artistry stuff, because we have people involved at Farsight that are really great. They're models. They work with artists all the time. In fact, that's how I met a lot of them. I met Yeme Janae in an art venue called the Apache Cafe in downtown Atlanta. That was that previous venue for that. They later moved on, but it was originally a venue that happened on Spring Street in downtown Atlanta. And a friend of mine and I were two artists. I was a photographer at the time, and my friend was an artist, and we saw Yeme Janae on the podium, and that was at a time when she had serious sight problems. So her sight's been fixed, but she was going blind, and she couldn't see anything. Her glasses were like old Coke bottle type glasses. I mean, they were really thick, but she couldn't wear those when she was modeling. So she couldn't see faces or anything. She was up there on the podium. She looked spectacular, and she was a model. But because she was near blind, she developed her telepathic capabilities, her intuitive capabilities, sort of as a self-defense mechanism to be able to sense the people around her. And my friend and I were looking at her, and she had like 50 photographers going crazy all around her, as she was posing in these exotic costumes. And my friend and I said, wow, that's amazing. Sure would like to talk with her, but she wouldn't give us the time of day. Look how popular she is. But then I said to myself, if she knew remote viewing, that type of charisma, that could change the world. I mean, the old military guys, they don't have anything like that who are involved in the old military remote viewing. You have someone like that, if she was taught remote viewing, that would be amazing. Anyway, eventually I was able to have some conversations with her, and my friend and I originally thought we wouldn't be able to even talk with her because she looked like she was so popular and there was photographers all over the place. But eventually I did have a conversation with her, and it turned out we just clicked. There was an intuitive understanding, and she really she thought it was great. She wanted to do that. And then eventually she got her eyes repaired with one of the best eye surgeons in the Southeast at Emory. And she had new lenses put in, like inside the eyes. It was a big thing. And she now she can see amazing. She has sharper vision than anyone I know. It's like laser vision. But it was interesting. Had she not been in that near blind situation, she was legally blind. That's how the law categorized her. But the doctors said she was going to become totally blind. Anyway, but had she not been in that situation for so long, her telepathic capabilities may never have actually flourished like that. But then once her sight was fully restored, she still had that telepathic capabilities. So she still is that artist who was up on the stage all that time. Similarly with Shantae, similarly with Kamaya, the type of artistry that they do on stage is like, whoa. And so we're thinking of ways to sort of incorporate that as much as possible. If you look at the stuff that comes out, for example, with science fiction stuff, you always have interesting costumes, attractive people doing interesting things. And so we really have very interesting people doing very interesting things. So we're thinking of trying to add some of that to our content. Nothing that would take away from what we already do with remote viewing. It just to add a little bit of artistry in it so that it becomes sort of a more edgy, experimental sort of collection of stuff. Like if you look at any particular streaming service, you see a lot of different stuff happening in each show, and we're trying to sort of follow that type of example where we're trying to be unrestrained with regard to our creativity. Okay, so that's a lot of changes that we're going to be having. Though there's going to be that Farsight Weekly thing that's going to be starting next Friday, and then the segments that'll be added to each one of the Farsight Weekly things. And then we have the forum stuff that I talked about earlier, and all of the major changes with regard to all of the other shows. So the farsightprime.com content is going to be huge, and I'm going to be interacting with you on a regular basis, weekly, as well as sometimes during the middle of the week as things happen in the news that I can comment on. And that's sort of a lot of interactions, especially with the forums, people interacting with the forums. So there's a real reason to sort of go to the forums. The forums at farsightprime.com are extremely active to begin with, but now we're going to have an extremely more interesting interaction that's going to be occurring during the month as well, okay, between the Farsight people and the people asking questions on the forums, which is going to be really an interesting and exciting interactive time. All right, everybody, this is great. You all showed up. We have a real great audience. We have well over 400 people in the audience right now on the live stream, and the recording of the live stream will, of course, be up on farsightprime.com probably by tomorrow, and that is great. And I will be seeing everyone in the next Farsight Intelligence Briefing, but also I'm going to be seeing you all on a week on the Farsight Weekly show. It'll be Friday evening that happens. So, and then you'll be seeing me every week on the Farsight Weekly show, together with one of our correspondents, as they would say it on the daily show, but in terms of our weekly show, there'll be our remote viewers one at a time coming on the weekly show as well. We'll call them correspondents because in a very real sense we are a news organization. We use a novel methodology for getting the information that we present to you, and we think it's better than what you get in the mainstream news by far, because with the mainstream news you're really dealing with heavily manipulated, heavily censored information. You really can't, it's really hard even to read between the lines with what you get in the mainstream news. And here we don't deal with information as the mainstream news deals with it, with this all he said, she said stuff. Various governments, various people tell them things and they report that. That's he said, she said stuff. So what we do is we collect raw data under totally blind conditions, really scientifically defendable, and we show you those data. So that's real raw data that you see. Now, it's a novel methodology, and it took us years to master this methodology of remote viewing. But we do it, and we do it well. And so you really get from Farsight stuff you can get from nowhere else. All right, everybody. Let me check the computer on the side just to see how the things are going. That's actually great. And so I'm going to wrap it up now. I want to thank everybody for coming, and I will see you, of course, next month in the intelligence briefing, but I'll see you in a week in the Farsight Weekly show on Friday. Take care, everybody, and until next time, stay well.